I'm thrilled to be able to kind of host this today. The Eastside Freedom Library does have a labor advisory committee that meets once a month. Kathy Hansen, who's sitting way back there, Kathy is also a bad role model for retirement, is retired from the American Postal Service, the American Postal Workers Union, but is still editor of the Minnesota and Minneapolis Postal Worker Union newsletters. Kathy and I co-chair the Labor Advisory Committee. Let us know if that's something you'd like to get involved in. We meet once a month and try to brainstorm about good projects, good activities to bring here to the library. So today our focus is fighting for our time, particularly on the topic of perhaps a 32-hour work week, and especially the on-the-ground work that was done within MAPE to try to bring that 32-hour work week proposal to the bargaining table. But we're broadening the perspective today as well. And so our presenters are John Crea, who's written a book on the shorter work week. And John has generously brought copies of the book here and is offering them to you for a donation to the Eastside Freedom Library. And we've already stumbled over our low technology capacity. Someone wanted to buy one, or someone wanted one and make a donation with plastic. We don't have a means to take the plastic, but we do have envelopes. And so if you want to take a book and take an envelope and take it home and send a check back, everybody will be happy. So John is going to present kind of a broad context. We have Daisy from do we say WorkFourMN or Work for Minnesota? Both. And about the broader efforts beyond MAPE and the state employment to try to bring a shorter work week to us here in Minnesota. Cindy Wyvoda is an electrician and a member of the library's Labor Advisory Committee and a member of IBEW Local 292. And Cindy has worked on in a shorter work week, and she's going to talk a bit about her experience. Amber Morin is with MAPE, and pardon me? I'm sorry, Amber. She's Morin. Amber Alden from MAPE, and she and Andrew Ulasic, also from MAPE, are going to talk about the campaign within MAPE and the impact that it had on membership involvement and on the kind of inner spirit of MAPE, and perhaps the possibilities yet, maybe next go-round, of getting that 32-hour work week. So the plan today is we're going to have a series of relatively short presentations, then we'll have a little bit of Q&A, then we're going to try breakouts, and Andrew has got some questions to ask you to wrestle with in a breakout. Then we'll come back to a report out, and then we'll talk about maybe things that we might do to materialize this desire, this vision, to have more time. And hopefully we'll wrap up by 3. That's the plan. And again, there's plenty of goodies in the back, courtesy of MAPE members who have brought stuff in. So, John, you have your microphone there.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much, Peter. And thanks for including me on this panel. I do appreciate an opportunity to talk about shorter work weeks whenever possible. I did write a book. I actually wrote the first edition of this in 2018. At the time, it was called Recalibrating the Labor Market, which is kind of a wonky title, when the real title should have always been Shorter Work Weeks and Stronger Families. Okay? So, as Peter said, I've got some copies back in the table there if anyone would like to buy a copy. I'm suggesting $20 as a purchase price, which is a real deal because on Amazon you have to pay $15 for it. So okay, enough on the book. Okay. All right, when invited to participate in this panel, I wrote a query into ChatGPT. I said, I need an outline for a 5-minute talk on the economic, social, and cultural benefits of a shorter standard work week with no loss in weekly pay for the workers. Okay? 1 second later, I swear, 1 second later, this popped up on my computer. Okay? And I'm going to go through it line by line just so you see what is available to all of us, or for all of us, or we'll see. Okay, ChatGPT said, here's your outline. Start with an introduction, a hook. Start with a compelling statement or a question. Example, what if we could all work less and still earn the same? Imagine the positive effects on our economy, society, and our own well-being. Well, for me, the hook is, holy cow, this thing's here. All right. AI is coming for your job. Now, you can read that 2 different ways. AI is coming for your job. Or you could read that, AI is coming for your job. Right? Let's hope we, now it's coming one way or another, so I would suggest the better attitude is the second one. The AI is it's gonna be a useful tool for all of us in the generations to come. With or without our cooperation, it's coming. Okay. All right. After the hook, it said introduce the concept, explain the idea behind a shorter work week with no loss in pay. Purpose. I'll discuss how a shorter work week. Okay. All right. It gave me an outline. All right, a step-by-step recipe for how to give this 5-minute talk. And then the first category was economic benefits. Increased productivity. Studies have shown that shorter work weeks can lead to more focused, efficient work. Give an example, like companies like Microsoft Japan saw productivity increase of 40% with a 4-day work week. A boost to the economy. When people have more free time, they spend more on leisure activities, boosting demand in sectors like tourism, retail, and entertainment. Okay? Lower healthcare costs. I wouldn't have thought of that. Reduced work stress and longer rest periods lead to better health outcomes, potentially reducing employer healthcare expenses and public health burdens. Okay, and this is the one that I stressed mainly in my book. Job creation. With a shorter work week, businesses may hire more employees to cover hours, reducing unemployment. I'm going to change that may to will. All right. All right, second, social benefits. Improving work-life balance. We've all been reading lots about this, and we've all thought about this. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting in this room, I presume. A shorter work week allows for more time with family, friends, pursuing personal passions. Example, parents could spend more quality time with their children as opposed to just time. Fostering better family relationships. Reduce burnout and mental health benefits, again, going back to the benefit to us personally. More time for education and personal development. Increased civic engagement. This, I think, is probably one that we should pay more attention to. People have more time to volunteer, to vote, to engage in community activities, to lead a stronger, or leading to a stronger social fabric. Okay? Third, cultural benefits. Work culture shift. Moving away from the traditional hustle mentality could promote a culture of well-being over productivity at all costs. Okay, now I take issue with this one, Mr. AI. I kind of like the hustle mentality. I think a lot of people do well in life by hustling, whether on the job or at home. or wherever, okay? Increase creativity and innovation. With more time to relax and recharge, individuals may come up with more innovative solutions and ideas, enhancing creativity in the workplace. Sounds good. Strengthening social connections. More freedom, more free time allows people to build and nurture relationships with family, friends, community, which is key to a cohesive society. And I talk about that a lot in the book. Reevaluation of work-life priorities, a shift toward prioritizing well-being can inspire cultural changes in how a society views success, moving away from long hours as a benchmark. 40 hours is kind of ingrained in everyone's head as to what a full-time work week is now, and it has been for 80 plus years, right? There's no real reason why 40 is the number. None whatsoever. We ended up there and we stopped pushing at that point. And there's, Peter knows a lot about this, and back in the 30s when we reached that 40-hour point, there was an intent to keep going down to 30 and down to 24 and keep going down. It didn't happen for a whole slew of reasons, but there's no reason why it can't happen now. All right? Okay, finally, number 4, global examples and evidence. They said in the outline here, I'm supposed to give highlights about how experiments have worked around the world, like Iceland's 4-day work week trial showed higher productivity and worker happiness. New Zealand's perpetual guardian experiment, I'm not personally familiar with that one. I'd have to look it up and see what happened there, which resulted in higher job satisfaction and no drop in output. And then cite some research as to how shorter work weeks lead to higher levels of job satisfaction and improved mental health. Okay. And then it says, be sure to conclude, wrap up your talk, and it says a call to action. All right. But I think we can wait until the whole panel's done before we tackle that step. And it says Q&A, but again, we'll do that after we're all done talking here. So with that, I'm going to close. I thank you very much for all showing up here today and all having a strong interest in this. I think it's something that we can actually get done in our lives if we keep plugging away.
All right. Well, hard enough to follow John, let alone John plus ChatGPT, but can everyone hear me okay? Hi, I'm Daisy Morin. I'm a founding member of Work4, the national campaign for the 4-day work week, and also a co-organizer with Andrew of our Work4 Minnesota chapter. And I'm committed to this movement because for me, the 4-day work week has been the difference between living my life on a treadmill and feeling like I have the ability to be a full person outside of work. Maybe some of you today are here because you feel like you're on the treadmill now, like there just aren't enough hours in a week to earn a living and take care of yourselves and your families. Some of you are probably working multiple jobs, maybe being asked to work way more than 40 hours a week at one job, maybe while also taking care of your kids or a parent. You're definitely not alone. American workers are overwhelmed, burnt out, and facing major changes from AI, like John just talked about, and also a tumultuous economy. The way we work isn't working. And it's not working now. It's probably not going to be working in a future where we pull up ChatGPT can write our outlines in 1 second. There's definitely a better way. Hundreds of organizations across the US are already adopting the 4-day, 32-hour work week, and I get to talk to a lot of them. The number one word that I hear from them is transformative. People tell me about having more time for themselves and their families, about having better focus and satisfaction at work. I talked with one video editor whose Minneapolis office had just made the switch the week that we spoke, And we were on Zoom. He looked around at his office and he was like, yeah, you know, everyone just seems lighter and happier. And he looked lighter and happier. And then I was lighter and happier. 42% of people who are working a 40-plus hour work week are burnt out. When you look at people who work a 32-hour work week, that number falls to 9%. I personally am still waiting for anyone to show me a corporate wellness program that has those kinds of results. Studies also point to numerous societal benefits. I won't run through them all since I think John just did an excellent job of that, but I do want to add my personal favorite, which is men doing more housework. It's a win for workers. We call it on the Work4 team a win-win-win. A win for workers, a win for employers, and a win for society at large. We talk about this often as a thing that might be coming in the future, but we see it happening now. Last year, Bernie Sanders introduced a 32-hour workweek bill in the Senate, and he says that when people start to stop him to talk with him today, that's the number one thing they want to talk with him about. Similar legislation has been introduced in 10 states already. The UAW included it in their negotiations last year, with Sean Fain correctly calling it a human rights issue. Other unions, from Kickstarter to the New York Times Tech Guild to CWA, are also fighting for it and winning it. Across all industries, from professional services to healthcare to law enforcement to manufacturing, employers are trying it and they're finding that it works. 90% of the employers that try it keep it voluntarily. On the Work4 team, we know that it's going to take policy, unions, and employers, and changing the public narrative to accelerate this change and to ensure equity in the transition. And we're seeing that happen. Completely agree with John. This is a change this is going to become the norm within our lifetimes. Here in Minnesota, I think we have a really exciting opportunity to lead the charge. If we want to be the best state to live, work, and raise a family, we can and should be the first state to fully adopt the 4-day, 32-hour work week. And it starts with us. It starts with people like Alyssa, who went to her boss and said, hey, in 2 years, I really want to be on a 4-day work week, and I would really like that to be here. What can we do to make that possible? It starts with people like Amos and Brittany at Ron's Plumbing in Mankato, who included a question about the 4-day work week on a staff survey, and based on the responses they got, figured out how to make it work for their team. It starts with the incredible campaign that MAPE is running, with today's discussion, and with all of us coming out to caucus for this in February, and bringing our friends along with us. I'll close out and just say, I think the pandemic really helped us see that our time is our lives. Our existence on this planet is brief, and we should spend more of it with the people we love, doing the things that we care about. I'm really grateful to each of you for coming out today to talk about this and organize for it. I'm really excited for today's discussion. And of course, I will invite all of you to join our chapter. We are 100% taking signups. I know that together we can make this happen, and I really can't wait for Minnesota to be the state that the rest of the country is looking towards as a beacon of what's possible.
Wow. Is this one working? Okay. I did not realize that there was shortened work weeks happening so much all over the country. That's so cool. I'm just here because I've had experience working a shortened work week. I'm Cindy Vivoda. I'm a 37-year IBEW member. I'm an inside construction electrician, so I wire construction, commercial buildings, industrial buildings, power plants, things like that. I also travel. We have the opportunity in the IBEW to travel all over the country and work in different locals under their contracts. In 2015, I had the opportunity to go work in San Francisco, and San Francisco has a negotiated 7-hour work week, so they work 5 days a week, but 7-hour days. I didn't even know that when I went there, but I absolutely loved it. We started work at 8 o'clock in the morning, so I didn't have to hurry up and get to bed at 8 a.m. so that I could get up at 5 o'clock and drive to work, you know. And then in the evening, it was like, this sounds crazy, but it was like having a whole nother day. It was like having 2 days in one day. Because after work, it's like I had a whole day to do stuff, and I could stay up late and whatever. So because I loved it so much, when I came back to Minnesota 9 months later, and this is 10 years ago, I've been talking to all my coworkers. And when I travel to other jurisdictions, because 8 hours is the norm, most places for us, for construction workers, and I try and convince them and tell them how great it is, and they always ask me the same question, will I make the same amount of money? That's what they want to know. And so I know they want to work less, and the way I know that is because our negotiated contract says that we work 8 hours. We get 2 15-minute breaks and a lunch that is unpaid, half hour. They always skip their second break. That's the norm in our industry. They skip the second break so they can leave 15 minutes early. I know they don't want to be there that extra hour. So they want to know if they could make the same amount of money. So I called Local 6 in San Francisco, and I asked them about that. I just called them this week. And they actually sent me the contract when this was passed in 1965 on my birthday. I think I might have something to do with that. I don't know. And the way that they did it is they forego getting a raise for 2 years. So the money that would have gone for a raise paid for the first year a half hour of their time, and the second year another half hour of their time. So over a 2-year period, they didn't get a raise those 2 years, and then the third year of the contract they got a 6% raise. So that was the contract they negotiated. And I also knew that there's one other local that has a 7-hour work week or work day that I know of, and that's Local 3 in New York City. And so I called that local as well this week, and I said to the rep, hey, could you give me any history? When did you guys start your 7-hour work day? And he said, I have no idea. As long as I can remember, we've only worked 7 hours. I can't imagine working more than 7 hours. And that's like us. We can't imagine working 10 hours or 12 hours. How cool would that be if our kids and our grandkids can't imagine working 8 hours? That's it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Alton. I work as an innovation consultant at the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. I am also, more importantly for this conversation, a member of MAPE. I am the vice president of Local 501 in MAPE, and also helped, alongside Andrew and some other folks here, lead the 32-hour work week movement. So Andrew and I are gonna talk about this together, and so I'm gonna start first by giving a sort of broad overview as to like what the 32-hour work week was, why we did it, and sort of some of the like narrative work we did around it. So our goal was really simply to advocate for a 32-hour work week ahead of contract negotiations that happened this summer. And so I think that for me, in being a part of this movement, so like my background is as a sociologist, and so I approach everything I do, particularly like the work, the organizing work I do, with like thinking about affecting systemic change. And for me, like advocating and doing this work around the 32-hour work week was less about my own material interests and more about like building worker power, because like I think that like my orientation to the world is that like we need to eradicate capitalism and white supremacy, which are the same thing basically, and like the only way to do that is to like radicalize people to their conditions, and like one of the ways that you can do that is through people's workplaces. Yeah, that's really like what my like orientation was, and like advocating for a 32-hour work week. And so with that, I think that like I think a lot about like strategy and like narrative, and I think a lot of like what I help to do is like think about like how to communicate the importance of the 32-hour work week to people, to other MAPE members, right? And so like a big part of that was like breaking down these deeply held assumptions that people have about the 40-hour work week. And someone else mentioned it as well, but like there's this, and I think people like have this idea that like 40 hours is just true and it's just the reality of what is and it has always been. And like that's intentional, right? Like that's like a result of it also, you know, when you trace every problem, it all goes back to Ronald Reagan, really. You know, it's like that's like decades of work of like anti-union activity, right? That like people don't know labor history. They don't know that like they used to just have you on a shop floor working you for hours, like endless hours at a time, and there were no benefits, right? And that like, so breaking down that systemic challenge that like to get people to believe that like this thing that they think is real really isn't, and that like you can like do your work in a shorter amount of time. And so like and so taking and seeing that like in the conversations that we were having, and in we were holding like, what was it, bi-weekly, I think, like informational calls that just kept getting like bigger and bigger, right? And like a part of that like became like teaching a bit of like labor history to provide folks with that context to really show them how like the wins that we take for granted today, or sort of take as natural, or take as being just things that like kindly employers have just given us out of the goodness of their heart, are actually like things that people have like fought and died for, and that like we can win. We've won in the past, and we can win again. And so we also had to, and I think you talked about this a bit, like disaggregate hours worked with pay, because I think for a lot of people the immediate question was like, well, I don't want less money, so like and being willing to like also say that it's like totally honest, like we don't have like that worked out, like how, like we know that like our orientation is to like for people to have no loss in pay and benefits, but like being able to like have I think we were like really intentional about being able to like have conversations with folks that's like, we will build, like part of what we want to do is like build this together, but like our orientation and our mission statement was to advocate and win a 32-hour work week with absolutely no loss in pay or benefits, right? Because there's also in state employment, like the number of hours you work is also tied to the amount of PTO accrual you get, and other sorts of benefits that you have as well. And we would also in those informational calls, like after starting with like that really strong mission statement, also we would ask people to like share either out loud or in the chat like what having a 32-hour work week meant to them. And I think, Andrew, this was like, I think this was your idea if I recall it correctly. And I think that was always like a really, really strong moment where like people would get really, really vulnerable, and they would talk about like sick parents and children and childcare and like other sort of just life needs that they have, or like other sort of creative outlets that they wanted to be able to partake in that they couldn't because they didn't have the time for. And I thought that was always like a really, really strong and powerful place to start, because people not only got to like think about what more time would mean like for them and in their own lives, but they also got to like hear from other folks that they were working with about what it would mean for them as well. And then finally, we also did a lot of narrative strategy and work around like showing people that the 32-hour work week already exists. And so much to my chagrin, we had to talk about the police and how they did something well in Colorado. And like talked about the Golden Police Department, and also talked about other organizations and entities in the Twin Cities that were also moving toward a 32-hour work week. I remember like while we were like in the midst of this, I think it's Nexus Community Partners, they posted they posted like a director role that was like fully remote, totally at 32-hour work week, at a 32-hour work week, right? And being able to show people that it's like, no, like literally like this is happening today. This isn't some far-flung fantasy, but like people are doing this, and it's a reality, and like you can make it work. And so the campaign was ultimately like not successful in this round of negotiations, but like I think so. I've been a member of MAPE for like a year and a half, and so I heard from a lot of different folks who've been in MAPE much longer than me that like that the campaign was energizing in a way that things hadn't been previously, right? That like people felt like an energy and a swell of attention that hadn't previously existed. And I think also the 32-hour workweek movement like surfaced issues that are happening today that I think sometimes go unnoticed. Like a big issue for folks is that exempt employees are not able to like claim overtime, right? And like they are often working beyond the hours that they are contractually obligated to. And so I think that was also a really important point that I don't think fully got addressed in this cycle of contract negotiations, but was a priority in a way that it hadn't been before. And I think most importantly, I think the thing that and I think am still like sort of admittedly like thinking through and like reckoning with is like, I think that like the 32-hour work week already also like was this like radical like pivot point. I think it like exposed for people that it's like, oh no, like we can ask beyond for what's just the status quo. Like we can actually try to and move toward affecting like deep radical change and disrupting like structures and systems in ways that maybe they'd never thought about before. And I thought that that was a really important like aspect of the movement that like I keep sort of just thinking about it and like trying to understand what to do with, because I think that like that energy is really important to get people to thinking about like I was doing a leadership workshop with the African American Leadership Forum last week, and we did this strategy about like radical imagination and like radical visioning. And like I think that the 32-hour work week movement like was that sort of radical visioning for a lot of people, that it's like, oh, like our structures can be totally different. And it's like, yes, and that, let me introduce you to my friend Karl Marx and about like how we can, like, this is just the first step, I promise. And I think that like, that energy is like so important, and I like, think that it's just like visionary for like thinking about the future.
Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Ulisich. I'm also a member of MAPE. I work in the Department of Commerce in Energy Division. When before I came to the state, I had a different job during the pandemic, and I was lucky to be able to work from home during that time and still have a job. But what that meant is that my home and work just really started to bleed together. And I found myself, at the dinner table with my wife and my son, who was 3 when the pandemic started, responding to work texts at the dinner table, and reading work emails like right before bed, and then waking up at 4:30 in the morning, thinking about those work emails and not able to sleep, and like taking phone calls while I was at the playground with my son. And I really started to feel a lot of things, but I like my time wasn't my own, and that also I wasn't the kind of dad that I wanted to be and that my son deserved, and felt like my time was being stripped from me. And at the same time, I started hearing about this movement for a 32-hour work week. There's all this research from around the world and in the United States as well, from these companies that had started transitioning to a 4-day, 32-hour work week. and finding that it's working, that they're happy, that they're productive, that they're making money, which is what, and a lot of this actually has been employer driven, as a way to like keep people and increase productivity, increase revenue, which is not necessarily my orientation, but it really made me feel like, why are we doing this to ourselves? Like spending our whole lives toiling for, someone else's wealth. And like I think what Daisy said is like the pandemic really woke us up to like we don't know when life will end. And here I am spending all my time not doing the things I love with the people I love. And I started to make like individual choices. So I quit most social media. I'm still on LinkedIn, which is the weirdest social media. I got a flip phone. I quit my job, and I went to work at the state. But I think there's the work that needs to be done is so much bigger than the individual choices that we can make, that we actually have to make these changes systemically. And so I started talking to people about the 32-hour work week at the state where MAPE, so I don't know if it was said, Minnesota Association of Professional Employees. We are state workers mostly, although we are some cities, I think, and we just expanded to some McAllister staff. Yay. And so I went to work at the state and started talking to people like, hey, have you been hearing about this 32-hour work week? And they would start pointing me to other people in the state. We represent like 18,500 people, so pretty big. So they would be like, hey, there's someone over in this corner of the state who's also talking about it. And so we just started finding each other, and we were like, hey, maybe we should all meet together. And I think we invited 12 people for our first meeting, and 20 came. And we're like, okay, so there's some energy behind this, and thought maybe we should start a campaign. And within a couple months, we were meeting regularly, and we had developed like this info session, and people started going out across the union talking about this. And I want to emphasize that like many of us were new to the union. Most of us were rank and filers, like not in leadership positions, who just decided that we wanted something, and we're going to figure out what we had to do to go get it. And we really like grounded ourselves and the people around us in a few things that I think was really effective. One, grounded in stories Amber mentioned, just like people sharing really personal things. One of the other people who was like, hey, you should talk to Cody. Cody was, who was like not working at the state anymore, unfortunately, but Cody would tell the story of, having cancer and realizing how short life is, and that he wanted more time with his kids and his family. And those were the conversations that were happening across our union. I remember Ashley saying, like, my job's really intense. I work in the field. I have to work with the public, and sometimes they're really pissed off about something that's happening. And it's like exhausting for me. And my life would be so different if I could have an extra day to recharge. Would find this work sustainable. And I think, to me, like, that was the power of this campaign. It was like people getting really grounded in their own stories and their own coworker stories, and starting to imagine that something could be different, and that this was possible. I think, Peter, I thought you were going to kick us off with some labor history, but like, it was really, really effective too, to just be like, hey, remember, we have done this before. We went from 60 hours to 54 to 48 to 40 hours, and it is just because people decided they wanted to make things different, and they came together to fight for it, that we have an 8-hour workday, a 40-hour work week. And so, like, we rooted this in people's stories, we rooted it in possibility and imagination, and then we said, you have to do something if you're going to get this. And like, a bunch of people who who joined the campaign, we would say this at a lot of our meetings, was like, hey, if we are all volunteers here, if you see something that is missing in this, or you think this should be done differently, we need you to do it. So let us know, talk to us. And that's, I remember, Rachel, the first time, I think you were like, hey, I think this slideshow could be better. And I was like, you're right. Help like make it better. And now she's leading our communications efforts. So like, we asked people to take action. So we started a petition. Over the course of a few months, we developed, like I said, an info session. We had people doing those across the union. We did like over 30 info sessions. We have like 21 locals in our union, and so we got to many of those. And then 2,800 people signed our petition, our letter of support for this. 800 of those said they want to be part of the campaign. 300 of the 2,800 were not dues-paying members, by the way, and so I found this as something that was like interesting and energizing and activating even for people who were not paying dues. We trained 30 people to go do one-on-one conversations with those 300, and dozens of them just decided to join the union to start paying dues. We like, I don't know, I just want to like communicate how activating this was for people who had not taken action before, people willing to come to a 6-hour strategy meeting on a Saturday, not paid. And many of them had never done something with the union before or had not been super engaged. And it felt like we just like, there were things we'd done, I think, that were strategic, but also felt like we lit a match and it just like took off. And one of our hopes for doing this is to like really invite you all to think of like what could this look like in your own workplace, whether it's unionized or not, in your own union, or if you want to expand to new parts of the if you're trying to unionize new workplaces as well. So I think that's all for this section of the meeting, and we're going to move into Q&A.
Great. So I'll call on people, but if you want to direct your questions at a particular presenter, please do. And we can define question broadly, so if you want to make a statement, feel free to make a statement. Anyone want to start? Please. Yeah, Jessica.
Yeah, so a couple things, just thank you for being here, this is really awesome. Just wondering, can you give me your name again? Daisy. So in your work, I have a two-pronged question. Have you worked with eco-justice groups? Because with a shortened work week, you have less people commuting, and that's like a significant reduction in fossil fuels. So I've been part of circles where that's been talked about as well. And then, have you done any work with educators around the shortened work week? Because I feel like that one is, for my workplace, because I'm a teacher, is complicated because the state and capitalists, they don't use us just to educate the future, they use us as free daycare. And so there's basically like, if we were to go to either a 6-hour a day work week or a 4-day work week, there would need to be huge subsidies in terms of paying for expanding childcare. So I just want to know if you or anyone else has thoughts on any of those points.
Sure, I can start. I can start and then happy to pass it around. We're just skimming the surface, I would say, on both of those things right now. We actually did work with one eco-justice organization that was transitioning to a 4-day work week, and I think very appreciative of the benefits. But there have been studies that have shown that those benefits are real, and looked at what people do on their off days. Tend to stay closer to home, do activities nearby. So I think those benefits have been shown over multi-year studies at this point, and we're pretty confident that they are real. And then in terms of education, there are quite a few schools that have shifted to a 4-day work week. And what we have seen happen there typically is other programming pops up on Fridays. Friday is usually the day that is off. And we've heard people talk about doing things like, okay, there's now this additional care that's available, or we're going to rotate teachers. So it's I think parents definitely, when they were doing it, voiced that concern of like, what are we going to do with our kids on Friday? And a lot of options popped up. I will say I don't know how they are financed, and childcare is. The financial models of childcare are extremely challenging without adding the 4-day work week, to be sure. So, but I do know that it was for most parents in those school districts, it was a concern that they had, that they then said, oh, actually, this, we do have options for our kids. So, I don't know if anyone else would like to.
I would think that on balance, the cost of childcare is going to be less when we're all working 32 hours a week than when we're working 40 hours a week. Okay? If you take the sum total. Now, I know what you're saying is more the devil's in the details, how are we going to figure out that school part, where that becomes, But really, we're talking about spending more time with our families and less time at work.
I'm thinking in particular, if we have there's different ways this movement seems to be rolling out, where it's like focusing on individual occupations or individual employers versus like a broader, like just a across the board law or movement that we're trying to make happen. So if, say, I was thinking about organizing my workplace right now, I'm thinking about like if this isn't happening everywhere at once, then parents do have to think about it in the interim between a broader movement that encompasses everyone. But I mean, that's the end goal, is what you're saying, is we all have more time.
Yeah, I can speak to that just a little bit too. I think one is we are going to start pushing for policies that would. There are different. Daisy mentioned the 10 different states that have proposed policies. Some are kind of like trials, pilots, and in some places, like the Sanders bill is a mandate, and so it would be for all workers, and so that would really, create the conditions for people to be home when their kids are off that 4th day. I also think like in some places maybe the fight for more time is not exactly a 32-hour work week right now. Like I think flight attendants are fighting just to get paid for the time that they're on the ground, and because they're not in many cases paid for that. And I think I've heard from some schools like the prep time, like how much time do you do prep outside of those hours, and like what does it look like to get some of that time back? And I've heard during the pandemic for some districts like Wednesdays was a prep day, and that's like complicated, but I think what I've heard is it was really nice to have time to prep. And so like what would it look like to fight for more time? And as part of the, like before we're done here, we want to ask a couple questions like what are the challenges and how might you overcome those, or in different contexts. But the schools I think is the trickiest, feels the trickiest for, like you said, like one at a time kind of movement.
Great. I mean, it seems to me that the point that was made about that we take for granted, or the American society as a whole takes for granted that, like the 11th commandment was God decreed that there should be a 40-hour work week. And we just take it for granted. So at the very least, whether it's being pursued through collective bargaining or being pursued through legislation, to start a public conversation that the hours that we work can be something that collectively we choose what's sensible for the kind of lives that we want to lead. Thanks, Jessica. Other questions? Yes, Jess, another Jessica, yes.
I'm curious
I can speak for MAPE, and then Daisy has talked to a lot of different organizations that have different contexts. I do think there's like an initial like, well, that's fine for some people, but that could never work in my industry, and then it's like actually there are lots of examples of those industries doing it, like manufacturing, emergency response, a care home where you need people there all the time. So that is the kind of like initial thing, and there's the fear of, am I not going to make as much money? For us as state workers, we're in a tricky place as public sector workers. State workers, I think in particular, are kind of like demonized as like, which is a larger demonization of the public good. In general, we know that's a strategy to try and dismantle the public good. So state workers are hesitant to like get the spotlight on us for wanting something more, and to have people being critical of that. And that would absolutely happen if we put it on the table. And I think in February of 2025, public sector workers were really under attack from the federal government. We were experiencing a lot of layoffs. And so there's just a lot of what I think is reasonable fear about what it would look like for us in particular right now. I'll stop there.
Daisy, you would respond to?
Yeah, I'll add to that I would say one of probably the top thing that I hear, in addition to that's great for other people, but it could never work in my industry, when, as Andrew said, in fact, it is working in their industry already, just not at their organization. The other thing that I hear most is there's no way we could get our work done in 32 hours. And to which I'm always kind of like, well, have you asked your team? Because I can't tell you how many people reach out to me and say, how do I tell my boss that I'm already working 32 hours or less a week and I just want the day back? And I think that touches on a couple of things that we haven't talked about quite as much, which is, first of all, that I think Bernie Sanders highlighted this in his testimony when he introduced the Senate bill. American productivity has increased 400% since we introduced the 40-hour work week. We are definitely getting more done in less time and just not being compensated for it. And then also that, I'm losing my train of thought, but that when you ask people, hey, do you think you could get more done in less time? Typically their motivation to do that is pretty low if they're just going to be asked to do more work. If you go to your team and you say, hey, we'd like to give you a day back, do you think you could figure out how to get the same work done in less time? Like, probably they're going to figure out how to do it. And that's, I think a big piece of this as well is people engaging their teams in the process. A lot of organizations that I've seen have kind of come into it saying, oh, we have to have everything figured out before we could possibly dive into this. And the first thing that we talk with them about is, no, you need to open this process to your team and make it collaborative, because they're the ones who are really going to figure it out. So.
Please.
Maybe for Daisy and the MAPE folks, you talked about how you ran this really powerful campaign that was maybe not ultimately successful this round, but what is next in Minnesota and at the state? Because I am assuming that we won't just stop here.
That's a really good question, Brooklyn. So we are doing on October 10th leadership training, and that's the first in a series. I think that the goal now is to understand that it's like, okay, we need to like expand our power to be focused more on the electoral process. Lots of feelings about that, but like the reality is that, and particularly in Minnesota, and particularly in the Twin Cities, right? Like being involved in electoral politics, right, and being able to like elect pro-worker candidates, have to leverage like where we live to caucus for these folks or not, right, and to like really tie and to really build MAPE up as an electoral force, I think is now much more the focus. And I would love Andrew to talk about this, because I think you're spearheading a lot of this work to like think about like, okay, what does it mean when if we've built up so much power in MAPE that we go to state legislators to ask for more money to fully fund our government, right? Like to ask them to help advocate on our behalf for the 32-hour work week and other contract negotiation priorities, because I think it was clear in this round of contract negotiations that like we either didn't have that or didn't know how to like leverage that effectively. And so I think that like in the interim time between, you know, now and the next cycle of contract negotiations is to like really build up MAPE as an electoral force that has the power to wield at the negotiations table.
Yeah, I would just add kind of like some of the strategic thought behind it is like, you know, with the biggest hesitation to move forward, it being, what is the public going to say? Part of the strategy is like, well, let's get the public talking about the 32-hour work week, which is part of what spurred this conversation, as well as trying to situate the shorter work week in a larger set of demands for what working people deserve. And including, you know, public health care and taxing the rich to fund state government and higher wages and housing investments and childcare, like situating the fight for more time as a key labor demand within that. And we have this caucus and convention strategy, which, if you're not familiar, is a way to shape party politics, both the party agenda and the people getting endorsed. It's a way that organized people can really have an outsized influence on the electoral process if you organize a lot of people to do it. And so we are, bringing the fight for more time to party caucuses and as a way to like get a lot more Minnesotans talking about it. The one other thing I'll start saying, or I'll mention, is we've just started a conversation. Our focus has been really grassroots, just building union power. We've just started a conversation about kind of some grass tops works. We were approached by a supervisor at the state who's not in MAPE, who was interested in 32-hour work week and actually had talked to a commissioner who was like very curious about it. Unfortunately, that commissioner left, but just like, what would it be to start like seeding this conversation and trying to identify some commissioners who lead our state agencies to, you know, who would be willing to explore this. So that's just we just started that conversation.
I think you covered pretty much all of it. The only thing I'll add is the other lane that we see is accelerating voluntary employer adoption. So figuring out, you know, for employers that can opt into this, how do we encourage them to do so? We ran a pilot in the spring with nonprofits, a collection of people who wanted to make the shift for their organizations, and about half of them are either running pilots or about to start a pilot. So figuring out how we do more of that and expand it to other industries, and also how we support individuals who do not have, are neither in a union nor, necessarily, nor have positional authority to advocate in their workplaces.
I have a question. I can't remember your name, I'm sorry.
Cindy.
Cindy, one of the questions I had was, you know, coming from the more like trade union work, like how do you navigate these conversations when we're mostly talking about like professionals so far? So maybe tend to be professional folks working a lot in like technical fields and things like that. What's been your experience talking to workers, like your fellow coworkers, and navigating like some of the barriers they have themselves for a 32-hour work week, and some of the like, I don't know, judgment from non-trade workers or workers not in your industry that might have that towards like those conversations? It's Saturday, I don't know if I'm making sense. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if they care what other people think, but but they definitely can't conceptualize working less than 40 hours, but they definitely conceptualize leaving work early so that they can, yeah, because they've negotiated a contract and they've all agreed that they would work 8 hours, but they leave 15 minutes early and they say, well, yeah, but we had this negotiated break, this 15-minute coffee break, and we skipped that, so now we should get to leave 15 minutes early. But that's not cool to the customer because they paid you for 8 hours and they're looking out the window and you're driving away. That's not cool. So I know they don't want to work 8 hours, but when I talk to them about working 7 hours, they just can't conceptualize it because they just think that's not normal and I would make less money. Yeah.
Yeah, and on the same kind of thought, like one of the things that I think that we've thought about is like an intermediary would be bargaining for that lunch break to be paid time, so that it's not even like an 8.5-hour day. And I'm wondering if that's anything that anyone has like talked about, is because if you get that half-hour paid lunch break, then you're getting back math for me like 2.5 hours at least every week, right? So like, is that kind of discussion anything that like anyone has talked about, or is it like to get to that point of making it okay to say like maybe we'll work less, because we all say like we have an 8-hour day, but it's an 8.5-hour day.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. It's an 8.5-hour day plus your commuting time on each end. In our union, they negotiate the contract maybe once every 3 years is kind of typical. And they've got a little link on the website that you can click on where it says, give us ideas of what you'd like to see us negotiate. And every year I say a 7-hour workday. And they just I don't think that they ever take that seriously. I don't think they ever actually bring it to the contractors. So yeah, I don't think they would think about getting the half-hour paid. Well, I'll give you an example. We had our first shift was 8 hours, and you had the half hour that you didn't get paid. Our second shift was you worked 7.5 hours because you did get that half hour paid. Third shift, you actually worked 7 hours because they paid you for an hour lunch. But we gave that up in our last contract.
Cindy, I have a question. Would an extra day off have more impact? A 4-day week, 3-day weekend have a bigger impact on the thought process?
So it's pretty common also in construction work, especially heavy equipment operators, that they do work a 4-day work week, but they work 4/10s. And the contractor uses that 5th day. If it rains out one day, then you have to go to work that 5th day. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of people do like that, especially people that live very, very far away, so they only have to commute 4 days a week. Personally, I would rather work 5 days and work maybe like a 6-hour day or something. That'd be really cool, but.
I just want to back in the day when the Ford plant was operating in St. Paul with about 2,000 workers, management would have to hire 150 part-time workers to work Mondays and Fridays because absenteeism was so high on Mondays and Fridays. And in the case of assembly line work, you need somebody doing every part of it. So there was a way people were voting with their feet. I think, again, the point of the panel and the discussion is how do we make these more an explicit part of conversations, including getting people to actually express what would they really like. rather than assuming that it's carved in stone and you can't move it. Last question, Josh?
Thank you. So do you think this technology, I'm curious what you think about ChatGPT, do you think that this technology will make it easier or harder to campaign for a 32-hour work week? Do you think that that is going to be different for blue-collar jobs versus white-collar jobs? I'd love to hear your view.
There have been a number of newspaper articles in the last, I don't know, since people graduated last spring, of college grads not getting the jobs they were hoping for because they're not being offered. We still have a relatively low unemployment rate, okay? But it's going to get not so low, I think, as we go forward here. And the people it's going to hit are now going to be a lot of white-collar workers. And I see kind of an analogy here between how do we end up finally getting out of Vietnam? It's when they started drafting college kids. Okay, until then, you could avoid the draft by going to college. So the white middle class in America didn't worry about it too much. They weren't fighting that battle. Okay, now you've got the white middle class and the Asian middle class and the Hispanic and the black and all the other middle class families whose kids are going to college coming out and they're not getting the jobs they expected. I think there's going to be a fair amount of pressure to do something. And I think one of the most straightforward things we can do is to shorten the work week.
Can I just add? I just think there are moments in our history where like in the 30s with mass unemployment, so this was a way to shorten the work week because there was mass unemployment, but it required a militant labor movement to demand it, and and some elected officials to push that policy forward. And for many decades since then, I think technological advances have not automatically led to a more thriving life for working people. And there is no guarantee it is just contested whether or not we win the 32-hour work week because the conditions are better or more dire maybe. But I would just say we could use it, if that's the situation, but it is really up to us and whether or not there's a movement that demands it.
So just because we also think that after God decreed the 40-hour work week, that then he decreed thou shalt use breakout sessions. And we wanted to try a little bit of a breakout so that you all could have some conversation. And so if we could take maybe the next 15 minutes and ask you to cluster in groups of 5 or 6. Andrew, do you have handy the questions that you wanted to suggest?
Yeah, but you might want to write them down. I have 2 questions for you to discuss. One is about a challenge, and one is about strategy. The challenge one is also about strategy. So here's the challenge. What is a challenge to implementing this in your own context, and how would you overcome that, is question 1. Question 2, how could you use this strategically, the Fight for More Time strategically? So I give you a couple examples. If you're OPEIU and you're trying to break into new workplaces, office and professional employees, Or MAPE, trying to break into new workplaces. I have talked to professionals. There are some professionals in this room who are not unionized, who really want a shorter work week, more than maybe any other benefit. And how could you use this strategically to break into new places? If you're a policymaker, how could this be used strategically to change the conversation through policy? How could this be used strategically if you're in a workplace that is struggling with recruitment and retention? So just like think outside the box. How could the fight for more time be used strategically to advance good things in your workplace? So what's a challenge and how would you overcome it? How could this be used strategically in your work or your organizing?
Great. So 5, 6, 7 people in a group, whatever feels comfortable, and we'll give you 15 minutes and then we'll holler for you to come back. Thank you.